Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's tricky to sit here and try to figure out when this broadcast actually starts. So hopefully I didn't chop any words off there at the beginning, but I did come on early to do a short introduction, and I can already hear myself. Why is that happening? I must have another browser open. Let's go over here, and you stop talking. All right, let's try that again. This is why I don't jump in with the guest right at the beginning, because I don't want to make them suffer through that. And I want to apologize up front. I, for some reason, contracted some crazy kind of cold last night. So I am on a mixture of cold medicines. Yes, I took drugs today. So if I get a little out there or forget something, that is probably why. And we got Nate's Tech Services, Carl Letourneau, and welcome to everyone else for joining us this Thursday, 6 p.m. This is the Tech Hangout. I'm going to hit this fan. Remember I told you guys it's getting warm here? It is getting really warm in an enclosed room. I am super excited tonight because we have a guest who has training, education, and an understanding of a lot of the things that we kind of just take for granted every day in our lives, even those of us who are working on this hardware. We know a certain amount about it, but when it comes to the software and the manufacturing process and what goes into developing this stuff, I certainly couldn't explain most of that to you. So I am excited, like I said, to introduce him. We are going to be talking to Dave Xiang from another YouTube channel, which is pretty much, I think the name of the channel is what it is, but he says on the very top of his channel that engineering is awesome, and I'm going to take his word for it. Dave, welcome to the Tech Hangout. And did I not mute your microphone? What's going on? Oh, there we go.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. How's it going?
It's going great, man. I'm glad to have you on. And this is the thing about this Google Hangout interface. It's a little tricky. I do want to jump right in. And instead of, well, let's do a little background stuff, and then we'll get to some questions real quick. So you're in New York City right now.
Yes.
And you've been in, should we call it the engineering game? You've been in engineering for quite some time, correct?
I don't know if it's quite some time. I think it's probably going on 8 years or so. I graduated college in 2009. So probably like 9 years. I wouldn't say it's very long, but it has been a little bit. So I spent 4 years in California after college, and also 4.5 years or so in New York. But I'm originally from the East Coast. I grew up around Boston.
Okay. Well, when I say that, when we talk about technology, a year or 2 years is a long time. A lot of things can happen. So the fact that you've been involved in that for 9 years, even though it doesn't seem like a lot, I would assume it's a considerable percentage of your lifespan. And, things have probably changed dramatically since you were first introduced to it.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Just the general trend. I mean, recently software, I guess from an academic perspective during school, I got a major in electrical and computer engineering. I went to Carnegie Mellon, and they just combine those two majors, even though they're vastly different. So you could be taking like analog circuit courses and then be doing like digital design in the same semester. So there's
cool.
a wide spectrum of things, and they just kind of let you choose. So that major is very broad. So eventually I did that for a while, and I slowly started moving more and more into software. So I can say for the past 4 years or so, I kind of slowly transitioned. I don't know if it's for the good or for the better, but into more like a pure software developer, even though before I used to do a little more, was closer to the hardware. So
okay, that's interesting, because we tend to find that, at least within the phone repair industry or electronics repair industry, that we will tend to favor one of those two. We have kind of our hardware guys and we have our software guys, and it's somewhat rare to have anyone who's really a specialist in both of those areas.
Yeah, I guess so. It's usually at some point you have to just kind of be knowledgeable, maybe about everything, but like I don't think you can be an expert about all those different things. It's pretty crazy. Like I kind of know how the whole hardware flow works, but I wouldn't comfortably I couldn't like do that person's job. I couldn't like, lay out a circuit or design.
Gotcha.
I couldn't.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, right?
Yeah.
So I do want to go straight to this because a lot of time we used to wait until the very end of the stream, and by that time it was apparent. So I want to ask you right off the start here, when
Sure.
it comes to let's do everything, but let's start with phones. What are you using as your daily driver right now, and what made you choose that model?
Currently, I use an iPhone 8. I do. I'm not a really big phone user. I try to limit my time on the phone, but I do use it for reminders. I have it synced to all the cloud services. I like to take notes of things. My first iPhone was, I guess I started at iPhone 5 and then 6 and 8. And before that, I used a BlackBerry. I'm not sure why.
Oh.
I'm not sure why. And I used like some, I guess, dumb phones before that. I don't even really remember, but I remember my first cell phone was I was in high school. I guess that's a little late by today's standards, but I was in high school and I got my first phone, and first smartphone was a BlackBerry. Uh, and then I just got used to iPhones. I think personally I use a Mac, so maybe just the Apple devices are convenient, but that's what I currently use.
Okay. So just curious, I know I had a few customers that had Blackberries that they just refused to give up for the longest time. And one of the reasons they gave was because of some game, was it Breakout or something like that? It
Yeah,
came,
yeah,
okay, yeah, it was like, oh, yeah, I'd like to try the iPhone and the Android thing, but my BlackBerry has Breakout built into it, and I want to stick with that. Just like Nokia had that Snake game that everybody thought was so cool back in the
yeah.
day.
Snake
And when
classic.
you say, what's that?
No, no, yeah, you're totally right. Those are classic games.
When you talk about high school kind of being a little late for getting a cell phone, definitely a sign of the times there. It is. I
Yeah.
mean, we see kids at I want to say 3, 4 years old now, where their parents just hand them a tablet and they're already, you
Oh yeah.
know, there's a thing going around about they had some kids and they brought them a laptop. And the first thing they do is reach for the screen because there's no, what is this? What are these button things down here? Just start touching the screen. It's like, no, it's not a touch screen. You're gonna have to learn how to input the characters there. Hey, we've got a playlist. How's it going? Good morning. Playlist is on another time zone completely. Johnny Chang, good to see you as always. 1001 Noisy Cameras, and Carl Laterno, who likes to call him a specialized generalist. That seems like a bit of a contradiction. Speaking about BlackBerry, there is the new Key 2. That is a good one. Would you ever consider going back to BlackBerry?
Um, I'm not sure. I can't even. I know they're still alive and kicking. Like Rim, I know they're what city? They're in Canada, but they're hanging in there, I guess, and they're still coming out with new phones. But honestly, I haven't been too up to date with some of them.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
they're pretty. Man, I don't know. I get the feeling that they're not sure what they want to do. BlackBerry Enterprise was big at one time, and I want to say that when the Key 1 was released, it seems like I remember them announcing this, what sounds like a ridiculously small number. It was like, yeah, we sold like 300,000 units, or maybe it was a million or something like that. It's like, wow, you're excited about selling a million phones nowadays? That's not so impressive. So one of the things that personally I think would be cool is to have more competitors on the market. I mean, if you like Apple, that's cool. And if you like Android, you don't necessarily have to choose Samsung, but most people do. But it really is unfortunate that these other platforms have just kind of fallen so far behind that it seems, and BlackBerry, I believe, has adapted Android. So they're not using the BlackBerry OS anymore. But if you're not on Android or iOS, you're going to have a hard time starting from the bottom with your own operating system and
Yep.
building an app marketplace, number one, and
Yep.
then secondly, giving people a good enough reason to switch over, right? It's kind of like one of the two at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. That seems like a colossal task, and also the apps and the whole like environment and platform, that's tough to recreate. So
Yeah, that's why my poor Windows phone died a terrible death, because they never cut it in the
yeah,
apps. Everything else about it was great, but if you can't if you don't have the Netflix app and you don't
yeah,
have, the new Facebook version and all this stuff, it's never going to catch on. So
yeah.
sorry to see them go, but that's interesting that you went from BlackBerry to Apple and that's it. So no Android in there whatsoever.
Actually, I think I did have an Android phone briefly. and I think I did what everyone, I like rooted it and tried to uninstall like all that bloatware and stuff.
Hmm.
But I only had it for about a year because I just realized I was tweaking it so much. I think I more or less broke it, and then I just wanted. I think that's when I decided to get an iPhone, maybe keep things a little simpler, or something like that. But
Okay.
yeah,
So have you ever done jailbreaking stuff on your iPhone?
I have not. I have
Huh,
not.
I'm surprised because you're a software guy, so I thought that might be one of your things.
I used to try to, program for it. I think for a year and a half, I was doing mobile development just to see what that whole world was like. It's a very different world, WWDC. It's also, even if you think Apple itself is like a bubble, even the developer ecosystem is also a very just Apple, Apple, Apple. So
Oh, really?
I got a taste of it for like a year and a half, and then I decided I didn't. Mobile development is definitely it's very specific, but it was fun while it lasted. So I went to WWDC. I went to the one went in 2014. It was a really fun time, and but I don't really do mobile development anymore. But that's as close as I get to tweaking the phone.
Oh, okay. Now, since you mentioned it, WWDC obviously this week, and a bunch of announcements coming from Apple, all mostly software stuff.
Yeah,
And interesting also that you said that you kind of limit your time on phones, which is cool. I need to do that myself. I sit here and I go, wow, this is crazy. I've been spending way too much time. And between us guys, about a decade or so back, I was playing a video game and it would keep track of your total amount of time played on the game. And when I realized that was like, it would say, if you played every day for 24 hours a day, here's how much of your life you spent playing this game. And I realized that wasn't expressed in days, but in weeks. I was like, okay, I'm done. I just quit it cold turkey. I'm like, I can't spend this much time doing something. It's entertaining, but it's definitely not productive. So Apple and Google both or Android rather, both talking about coming up with ways to, for whatever reason, help people limit the use on their electronic devices. They've been getting a lot of heat for, Apple supposedly making their phones too addictive. It's like, it's so good that people are spending way too much time on them. We want you to do something about it, which I think is kind of crazy. It's like, if you have anything, it's not really on the person who provides that service to tell you, okay, you've had enough, right? I mean, but
yeah,
I can't imagine. And what do you think as far as, other than monitoring, there are things that are mandatory. Like if you were a parent, you could say, okay, we're limiting your phone use to this many hours a day. But for most of us who are adults, what could they do that would make us say, okay, I need to put the phone down? Any guesses? Like, I just can't imagine what would motivate me other than maybe reminding me of how much time I've been on there, I guess.
yeah. I guess reminding you maybe time wasted, or maybe like health hazards. Even like it goes so deep. It's like emotional or brain power you use on the phone. Also, it's terrible for your neck.
Oh
Also,
yeah.
kind of things. And um, I don't know. I think it's kind of by generations too. I think maybe like my generation, I guess the millennials are a little older, starting to realize it. But a lot of people do say that like the Gen Z, or like even the younger students, like their whole form of communication is very different and revolves around digital phones. Like I saw two girls like at the cafe just talking to each other, sitting next to each other with Snapchat, and they're like, "Did you see it?" And I'm like,
Oh wow.
they're like next to each other. So um, I think it's a little crazy. I think it's like potentially by generations maybe, but I think every generation kind of uses it a little differently. The technology, like we don't use cell phones the same as maybe like a high school person uses cell phone. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And Apple does provide a lot of these the hardware and the platform, but also I think a lot of blame is also on the app developers too. That you probably know, like Facebook and all the social media sites, they put so much effort into the addictive nature of all the apps, like just the layout, what they present to you. They have to be held maybe a little accountable to how much attention they really engineer for. So um, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it will be interesting. We have some proposed ideas here from from the chat. One is digital celibacy. I suppose
Yeah.
you could choose to become celibate with electron. Well, good luck though, man, because
Yeah.
these things are so important now. Like we
Yeah.
talked about this, trying to function without. Good luck trying to get a job without a smartphone. Because if they tell you you need to install this app, you need to have email, you need to be available for us to text, call, or whatever, communicate with you, you can't just shut that one off. At least while you're on the clock. Real World Review says, I think Apple has the perfect limitation: error 53, error 9, and error 4014. Hey, you left out error 4013. Those are kind of inside jokes. So occasionally Apple devices will do something strange where you cannot restore them and they won't power up properly. And those are some of the error codes that are a bit like the engine light in your car. It says check engine, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
But fortunately, there is a wiki that will kind of sort of help decode what those might mean, although they're not 100% accurate. Johnny Chang, going the Amish lifestyle. Okay. Free Bitcoin for not using your phone would be cool. Hey, Harvey, good to see you as well. Who's going to provide the Bitcoins, though? Where's that going to come from? Maybe some sort of advertiser, I guess. I don't know. I challenge everyone to do a face meeting twice a week without the convenience of smart devices. I take your challenge, Johnny. I'd be happy to do that. All right, so let's move along here. I tend to get on one topic and then we just keep going, but we definitely want to talk about this. Anyone who is just joining us, I want to show you real quick. Let me go ahead and make sure that I have the proper window here. We are talking to Dave Xiang, and his channel is actually the same as his name, but you can see on the top in a big banner there, it says engineering is awesome. And I'm sure it is. I've went through your channel. I watched a few videos, and there's some great stuff on here, everyone. My big thing is that, one, you've got playlists set up. So if someone wants to dig deeper into a topic, it's right there. To me, that's very important. I can't go scanning around someone's channel trying to just, figure out what's going on. Secondly, production quality is a big one for me too. So it's great that we can watch your videos. Let's not play the video, that we can actually watch your videos and they look great. And one thing I noticed about you is you do a lot of your stuff outside, which is cool. Not something that I've been doing, and I probably should.
I was just trying to maybe change up the scenery a little bit, but before I used to always do it. And then somebody suggested, just try going outside. And I just use my iPhone to film a lot of those things after I write the script. But yeah, outside it's a little fun. Sometimes it's a little unnerving talking and people are walking by, but
like, what is this guy doing?
Yeah.
That's cool though.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, we want everyone to know who you are. And isn't it amazing the quality that you can get from something like just an iPhone in a headset plugged in? I mean, it's come so far in like the last 10 years. It's just insane.
Yeah, it is insane.
So much easier to publish. Let's talk about your book. Dave, you just published your first book, correct?
Yes, I did. I just self-published my first book. It's called Software Developer Life. I have a video about it. It's kind of looks something like this, a little cartoony, a little reminiscent of Dilbert.
Oh, cool. So what's the so it's about the life of a developer. Like, is it written more like a story than as a technical piece?
Yeah, it's not a technical book. It's a lot of storytelling. The genesis of it was like, we all have engineering friends, different people in the industry. So I have a lot of friends in software too. And every time we get together, we share a beer, we always tell, oh, this happened at work, or like we'll complain about whatever. And then eventually I thought that like all of these stories are potentially very helpful to anyone. And also know, just on my channel too, I do probably half technical and also some more just storytelling. And I thought the storytelling and small bits of advice are always a little more relatable to everyone. So I just wanted to put that all in the same place, and also my experiences, my friends' experiences, and it's just hopefully very relatable, because I think besides technical knowledge, you have to be able to relate to something, and even if there's a little bit of that in a single story, it's potentially very helpful for somebody.
Yeah, and it's definitely, as someone sort of on the outside here, that would be a good way to hook me in, to say, hey, I want to read this book. If I saw some cool stories, or maybe the back cover has a thing and it sounds more like a conversation than a bunch of mathematical stuff that would most likely go over my head. That's awesome. Yeah. And were you doing some sort of promotion on the book, I think? or
I did some
oh, you did?
professional.
Okay.
I like talked about it in my channel. I just kind of self-published, launched it myself. I did attempt to go through the regular route, but I'm not uh, like a professional writer. So I like self-publish it, shared it on my channels, and like just telling my friends. So if anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about the software world, please check it out and let me know what you think.
Awesome. Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Question for you.
Sure.
What was your graphing calculator
Oh,
during college years? And then it says the venerable HP 48G series with a question mark. I have no idea what that means.
yeah. I don't know either. I think my graphing calculator days were in high school normally. Um, I used the TI-83 Plus, I think. It had the Alien game. But I used the graphing calculator a lot in high school. In college, though, it was just my whole life was on the computer, though, and inside a computer lab. So didn't use too many calculators then. But during high school, yeah, I had a graphing calculator.
Cool. I always wonder when, just standalone calculators would go away because we've got a calculator. I mean, maybe not a graphing calculator and maybe not the
Yeah.
same type of calculator, but certainly you could download an app or something that would do the same thing at this point, right?
Yeah, I think of course there's like the calculator on your phone, and I'm sure you could get like all the graphing calculator functionality on your device too. But I just remember the old days of having like the dedicated hardware where you actually have like buttons for everything. It's like
Hmm.
there is a square root button. You don't see like it's not a programmable set of pixels on the screen, but it's like a dedicated hardware. Those days are probably slowly fading away with the smartphones. But I remember we used to always hang out, like I know, talk about our graphing calculators, stuff like that. So yeah, those were the old days, I guess.
Yeah, I always want to go back to my math teacher who said, "Hey, you need to learn how to do this stuff because you're not always going to have a calculator on you."
Oh yeah, true.
Yeah, now you are.
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone is. Let's see. The book is part of Kindle Limited, so you can read it right now if you're a member. Oh, cool. So there's a good tip if you want to check out I guess the ebook.
Yep.
Awesome. Man, that's exciting. That's one thing that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I guess the first book is the hardest to write, they say, and really you almost have to do a second one because once you've shown, and you self-publish obviously, but once you've shown that you can put a book out and then you have a second one, supposedly that's a big deal.
Oh,
At least that's what I've heard. Because a lot of people talk about writing a book, but if you go, I already published a book and you want to work on another one, you might get a publisher that'll say, okay, we know that you're committed. We know that you've already put in the effort. You've done one. Let's see what you're going to do next. And who knows, man?
yeah,
Might,
yeah. It takes a lot of time. I felt like you always hear about writers complaining or having the writer's block, but it was a little up and down. It definitely took a while, but it's also very it's a comforting, relaxing process too to just try to like get all your thoughts like organize them and get them onto paper.
get them out. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
cool. Congratulations, man. That is
Thank you.
awesome.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it.
Let's see. Have yet to be interviewed by Computer File. I don't know what that means, Johnny. What is Computer File? Is that another YouTuber? Caesar, what's going on, man? Good to see you. And graphing calculators are still outrageously expensive. That's true. It's
Yeah.
funny. I used to work in an office supply store like back in the early 2000s. And for back to school, every parent was coming in buying these things. I'm like, what is so special about this? Again, non-math person, so I would have no clue on that. All right, let's get back to this before I get too far off track. You have a video, and this is one of the things that caught my attention about your channel, and it's a conversation that we have here quite often.
Sure.
Because if just to kind of give you an idea of what our part of the world looks like, if you are in the phone or electronics repair industry, every year there's this big scare that manufacturers are going to do something that eliminates your occupation, because we start to see that phones are more self-contained. Everything's built onto one board. They're getting smaller, more difficult to disassemble and so forth. And when I saw the title on your video, it says staying relevant in tech. That's the first thing that I thought of, because I had only been thinking about myself and people in my industry, but I would assume this is throughout anyone who's involved in technology in any way, shape, or form. You've got to position yourself so that you are considered valuable And I was surprised. I was somewhat surprised to hear that, in another one of your videos, I think, or it might have been the same one where you talked about changing jobs. It's a thing that happens every few years for the most part, correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think the video more so than jobs, I think it's probably potentially changing the environment too, because I was just mentioning that you cannot neglect the trends of the things like cell phones have been, of course, blowing up the past 10, 15 years. So of course the repair industry. So I just like changing jobs is just one, like, I think concrete way to look at it, but more so it's just like just being aware of the environment, where things are going. And if you at least think about that, you can probably hopefully steer yourself, whether it's a job or maybe your side project or whatever you choose to spend your time on, in like the right direction to, like, keep having some value as the times change, because that's obviously what scares us the most. Yeah.
I want to say that, and automation and or AI in some
Yeah.
form, because that's a big one when you really look at maybe not what we're doing today, but the pace at which things are advancing. We see. I mean, they're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of people losing their jobs to
Yep.
automation.
Yep.
And we've seen it happen, and we know there's going to be self-driving cars. If you work in a factory, I encourage you to find something else to do. But they've also talked a lot about things like the medical industry and even legal,
Yep.
people who are involved in law. It's like, eventually a lot of what you do won't be required anymore because it's all going to be performed by a machine somehow. And that one, I don't know, what are your feelings like that? Let's say over the next 10 years, if we fast forward to 2028, and you could just, kind of imagine what type of world we might live in, what would you expect to see by that point?
Oh man. Yeah, I think that's one of the things. I think maybe the higher level jobs, I guess, like law or like drafting like legal documents or healthcare things, maybe like a doctor could potentially even be replaced by some of these new AI machine learning movements. I think I think people just have to stay flexible and be able to, like, just adapt their jobs a little bit. So I think like the radiologist, instead of the radiologist spending all their time looking at a thousand photos and giving a diagnosis, maybe the radiologist does let a little bit of control loose to potentially the computer. Like they let the computer do some stuff and they focus more of their time on actually learning about the patient, or like doing some more human things that only a doctor can do. Same thing with law. Like instead of uh, telling all these paralegals to dissect a ton of books and draft the legal documents, you could let a computer control that to a certain extent, and maybe with that added bandwidth, take on more clients or focus on different cases or other things, because there's always going to be some jobs the computer can do well, and then some jobs only people can do, and there's always going to be certain types of work that only people are good at. It's like you don't want your bartender to be a robot kind of thing. So I think maybe in the future there, hopefully, I'm a little idealistic, but we could maybe shift and there could be much more focus on like the personable people aspects, and still letting the robots do their thing, whatever it is. So
I think you're taking a very positive attitude toward that, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
great because it's not difficult, especially if you've seen some of the stuff that, again, it may seem primitive now, but even when we look at AI and we look, like the Google phone calls they were making at the I/O, and then
oh yeah,
even these robots that they're coming out with now, I question, and again, I hope that you're right. By all means, I certainly am not saying we should ever give up and think that humans aren't going to be needed anymore. But I wonder if people might not eventually say, "Hey, this robot thing's as close to human. In fact, it's as human as it gets, and I'm happy with that. And it doesn't complain, and it does what I tell it to. It's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But I agree with you that the main thing is that probably a lot of people should look at uh, or careers or occupations or fields where you're going to be interacting with people, because that's probably the last thing that would ever go away, right? We want to have that human interaction, and there's certainly things that we do that you don't want to hear from a machine, right?
yeah,
At least now.
yeah.
So cool. Let's check. I like to try to stay up to date with the with the chat, and occasionally I answer questions that aren't directed at us, but that's just how it happens. Let's see. Hey, Max Square. Hey, good to see you, Max Square. And we just did a live stream last Thursday, and we did another live stream on Max Square's channel on Saturday. So you should certainly check that out as well. It is all one big party here. I want a self-driving spoon and fork. What? The future of jobs will be people with technical knowledge, such as Mr. Mike in engineering, who oversees all the systems that permeate the current infrastructure that run today's world. Oh, fair enough. Even farmers have to learn how to hack the software that run on their tractors. Yes, absolutely. I bet we will have robotic servers and still have to tip them. Did you see that X-Files episode where they had the automated restaurant? Or not a fan? Okay. All right. This is another.
I can imagine it. Yeah.
Well, they had someone had mentioned it in the chat, and they're like, "Oh, you have to see this X-Files episode, and it's the new X-Files." So I went and watched it, and they go to a sushi bar, and there's no people there, but there's this machine in the back that says, "Okay, would you like to leave a tip?" And they're like, "No, you served me the wrong thing," and they get locked in the building, and pretty soon drones are chasing them and stuff, and robot apocalypse for the most part. But yeah, if a robot insists on tipping them, it might be in your best interest, I guess. I'd like a robot to edit and publish all my videos. Me too. How much easier would that make life if all we had to do is this, and then someone else got to do the dirty work behind the scenes?
Yeah, editing, uploading, all that stuff. That'd be nice.
That is such a time-consuming. I never imagined. When I first looked at YouTube, I was like, oh, 10-minute video, this many views. I'm going to make 10-minute videos. Yeah, 10-minute video that takes you all day to make. It's crazy, but it's that thing where you're just never happy with yourself. It's like, oh, I should do this. Let me add that. This will sound better this way. I got to re-record that.
Yeah.
Which is the benefit of live streaming. Let's see. Involved with the is Mr. Xiang involved in the makers movement that is thriving on the East Coast?
Oh, I unfortunately am not too involved in. I'm assuming this is revolving around 3D printing and like maker things, but no, I have a couple friends that are involved in it over on the West Coast actually, but I'm not too deep into that over here.
Fair enough. So what? I think we kind of got this answer, but so we don't have to dig too deep into it. But what made you decide to make your channel on YouTube about engineering? Was it kind of the same thing that motivated you to write the book?
For originally on YouTube, I was just doing it more for fun, just to kind of explain technical topics. It was just a little bit more about sharing. My friend actually was the first person that told me to potentially start a YouTube channel, just explaining technical topics. And I guess what started as just technical topics, like started mixing in some of the more real life experiences that I started getting at work and career and all that stuff. So that's also the genesis of the channel. And I guess the book is just an extension also of the channel where I just try to consolidate all those things. Okay. It's just same reasons, like all the same reasons I talked about the book. It's very similar sentiment for the channel. So
okay, cool. Well, obviously it was a good move because you got what do you have? 40-some thousand. What do we have here? 46,000 subscribers. And I will say that was another thing that stood out about your channel to me is that it's just not. When I saw engineering is awesome, I really expected to see some dry material that I would not be able to understand, and it's almost like a vlog / engineering channel, right? So you get on there and you talk, and it's real life issues like you were talking about, transitioning from different occupations, and I think there was one about some interviewing stuff on there. So really cool material.
Yeah, all sorts of things, like just really the everyday things a software developer or somebody in this tech usually has to go through. So yeah, but
the crazy thing is that probably a lot of us sat back and said, hey, here's what I do every day. And there's not already a channel, or not really a popular channel about that. So I'm going to make this channel. And it always amazes me that I find all these little niche topics that I didn't even know were a thing. And they have, 10, 20, 50, 100,000 subscribers. So for someone who's involved in software development and engineering, I would expect that the future is only going to give you a bigger potential audience, because that is, what so much of what we do nowadays is made up from.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Especially software. It's definitely been trending really hard the past 5 years, and I think it's the accessibility of it, and also just I guess its demand has definitely increased even since I was in school looking for jobs and having a tough time. But I guess from what I hear now, it's people can really get into software if they want and potentially make like do a career switch out of it pretty easily, which is pretty crazy. But yeah.
Or they could make an app like Flappy Bird and retire in a couple months, right?
Yeah, you could make Flappy Bird. That's pretty crazy. Like,
Isn't that? I'm like, are you kidding me? But there's a $1 million idea. I think he made more than $1 million on that one.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So before we jump in, actually, I do have a couple more questions that are focused on engineering. But before we jump into that, and I want to talk about a couple phone things because we do phone stuff here. Any advice for someone who might be considering a career similar to yours? Like if you could go back to when you started studying this, and do something different, or tell yourself, do this and you'll be happy that you did. Any suggestions?
I would just, oh man, a lot of the things I'm gonna say are pretty cookie cutter, but I would just like always try to keep learning and like pushing out skills also that aren't engineering. Like one thing I talked about in staying relevant is like sometimes just being a little knowledgeable about one other area can really help you out. Like if you're just really good at like cell phone repairs, for example, maybe just like the little bit of knowledge in marketing or something else could really make a difference. I think for me, I just learned a little bit of accounting is one example. Like I just studied it on my own, a little bit of accounting, but just learning that has opened up a lot of doors for like the kind of work I've received and like other things I do in my software life. So I think don't underestimate different styles of skill. Like just try to mix skills, I call it, and that can be very helpful sometimes. And we also touched upon this briefly, but always be a little cognizant of the environment because it does make a difference. And like, if you worked at RIM, for example, and you didn't maybe kind of foresee that, they're not developing a platform, they're not really keeping up to where smartphones are headed. Like, it's probably if you're still working at BlackBerry or RIM, it might be tough for you to like just keep up with things. So a lot of people say like don't just follow the trends and the waves, and I also think you shouldn't blindly follow them, but you should just always keep thinking about them and where the future is kind of going to be, and hopefully position yourself in a good place. So,
okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Cool, practical, like you said, cookie cutter, but if it works, it works, right?
Yeah.
And that's what people should
We'll
definitely
see.
consider.
Yeah.
Let's see. You finalize a 10-minute. One thing that every
Would be.
Sorry, Johnny, you might have to rewrite that. I'm not going to be able to. One thing that every would-be engineer. That wasn't you. That was me. Every would-be engineer learn when they choose their branch of career is plan ahead your designs and have a pragmatic approach to solve problems. Okay, riding the waves of trends, a bit of a lottery. Hey, what's going on, John Cassidy? Good to see you with us this evening. All right, so let's talk about this real quick. Recently, if you didn't already know this, I'm going to put this on screen so everyone can see it. We had a little excitement about a bezel-less Lenovo phone, and it turned out to be a lie. I guess we're not really going to have this bezel-less phone because it actually has a notch and a chin. Why would you do that, Lenovo? You build up hype and then you disappoint if you pull the rug out from under your customers before they even spent their money. It doesn't seem like a good move, right? I mean, I actually got excited about it. I thought we were going to see a whole bunch of bezel-less phones here so that everyone else could say first. And it looks like, unfortunately, Lenovo disappointed. Now, on the other hand, we are supposed to be seeing the Vivo Nex, which we've talked about. And this, I do have a question for you on this, Dave. We talk about the Vivo Nex, which is supposedly going to be the first phone that has a, gosh darn it. Sorry, guys. I got to mute these tabs. That is so annoying. I hate when that happens. Okay, so their thing is a very small chin at the bottom, nothing else. No notch, no cutout for the speaker. 95% surface area on the front, which, we've come so far with smartphones. It's like, what else can we do? Well, give me more real estate for the screen. There's not a lot of frontiers left, that are realistic. So this phone is supposed to have built-in fingerprint scanning capability throughout or at least on the bottom of the screen. I think it's the lower third of the screen. And they figured out a way to build in sound, which wasn't a huge challenge. The thing about it is, I want to say this is one that has the little camera that pops up on the top, right? So the question is, am I wrong, guys? I think this is the one that has a camera that pops out on the top. I thought they had a picture of it here.
Pops out like those old school cameras with the flash.
So literally a retractable. If this is, I believe it's this phone. So you would have your phone. You have a camera on the back like this in case you want to take a photo. But if you want to do a selfie, you would activate a camera that shoots up from the top.
Oh.
Takes a picture and then retracts when you're finished with it. And the obvious, there is, how long does it take before that camera wears out? Some debris gets inside there and whatever, anytime we have moving parts, obviously that's the first thing that's going to fail. But overall, it does look like Vivo will be introducing the first, the most screen available on a smartphone to date. Snapdragon 845, which is kind of the flagship standard at this point, 6.6-inch display, 8 gigs of RAM, along with 256 gigabytes of storage.
Wow.
And 4,000 milliamp hour battery, which is awesome. And of course, it will be pre-installed with Android Oreo, but starting at $1,100. So if you're not Apple and you're in the US, obviously that price point might be a bit challenging. But they're for sure not going to be targeting just the US market with this phone.
Yeah.
Hardware wise, and I know you're more of a software guy, but this seems pretty challenging, doesn't it? To have one sound coming from behind the screen. I guess you've got some sort of substrate or material that allows the sound to just pass through it, but not like a window where it's muffled. It's going to transmit it, and you're actually going to get good quality sound.
Yeah, I don't know how they're doing. I don't know how they're doing it, and I guess I don't know if the sound is coming from the back of the phone or somehow specially coming in the front somehow. But I personally, I don't consider the audio too much in my phone because I use maybe a Bluetooth speakers for my headset very often. But it's interesting to see how much stuff they could potentially sacrifice for the one thing, because I think a lot of the phones, it's they just go super big on the screen, and then everything else is almost secondary. It's camera, no, it's not as important as maybe the screen. And I don't know. Hopefully, for me, my first thing is how practical can it really be? But it could look really nice. So
it can. But you bring up a very good point, and that seems to be the trend that we're seeing, where they're sacrificing a whole bunch of other stuff to make this one thing. And I always call out all of them, so I may seem a bit biased, but when they killed the audio head, the 3.5 millimeter headset jack, and I had to question why. What did we gain by removing that? Does the battery last that much longer? Did we just put in a 3D sensing Taptic engine that really at this point in time, most of us don't even think about? It's not something we use. And we've gone from a tiny little vibration unit that we used to use for the silent ringing function on the phone to something that's 3 or 4 times the size now, so that we can eliminate a very practical option, which is this, because if my battery dies, I need to plug in. So I always thought that was kind of goofy. And I think what you said kind of nailed it on the head. It's, we're focusing on whatever feature it is, and we want it so bad that we're willing to give up some other thing to make that happen.
Right.
And, I mean, that's bound to happen at some point, right? I mean, eventually there's no more space unless we continue to miniaturize.
Yeah.
Might be. Sorry, might be a good segue to my Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, I think when these phones are designed, there's probably a huge push and pull with all these things. You can imagine when the iPhone is designed, it could be 1,000 engineers being this is the most impractical thing of all time. And then you have some Steve Jobs who's no, I need the screen to be like this. So every time, I'm pretty sure every time these phones are designed, or when they're even thinking about the form factor or layouts, there's like probably such a tug of war happening at these companies. And I'm sure like some of the engineering practicality insights never make it into daylight, and the phone just
Oh,
looks
you
like
know,
this conceptual designer's dream, and then it's kind of strange when you actually see it. Um,
I never thought about that. You've got to have people that are working on wireless charging saying, we need this much real estate. We need this to make this happen. And
yeah,
you have people in the display department go, we need all this space and this, we need to dedicate these resources to making the display work. That's interesting. I never thought about the internal. I mean, I've had that happen in companies that I worked for before. You know, it's like whatever your job is, that's the most important feature on this thing that we're all working on, right? But everyone
right.
else in another department is going, nope, it's loss prevention. Nope, it's
Yeah.
R&D. Nope, it's marketing. Nope, it's this. And how do we allocate those resources? That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that before. But this is why I'm glad you're here, because if I explain it incorrectly, you'll be here to tell the way it really is. So,
Try.
as people say in layman's terms, you know, with the exception of screens and handset sizes now, things when it comes to electronics, they tend to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And people, oh, these things are getting smaller all the time. Remember, we had the little Zoolander phone that was like as big as my Bluetooth thing,
Yeah.
and now we're up to this monstrosity right here. So
Yeah.
you know, obviously it changes, but there was a reason why this happened, and there was a person way back, I want to say in the '60s, who came up with something, and they call it Moore's Law.
Uh-huh.
And his thing, you know, if you want to call it a law, I guess that's kind of debatable, but he stated that miniaturization would continue at a certain pace. And I want to say that he felt that that was indefinite, and it really isn't, right? We're kind of approaching the point, it seems, where we've made something so small that we're literally manipulating things at the size of an atom. So you can't
Yep.
really go much smaller than that, right? So when we see something, and I don't have an image here, but if we look at like an integrated circuit, and they talk about how these things have millions of transistors built into a single tiny little, you know, half centimeter square
Yep.
piece of silicone.
It's crazy.
What
Yeah.
I don't get is, how do you manufacture something like that? Because I'm trying to envision, I'm sure there's a machine out there, but how do you put so many little tiny things in such a small space accurately?
Oh man, like I'm not going to be able to explain that better than you in terms of the really insane machines. Like I'm sure you've seen the documentaries where people have to wear these crazy suits just to like handle those machines.
I haven't, and I didn't purposely, because
Oh,
I didn't already know, and I said, you know what, this would be such a better conversation if you could kind of explain it. Because if we go,
I
oh
mean,
yeah, just Google it, you know that.
yeah, I in terms of like placing them on, it's really crazy too because you have to have a lot of it's done by hand, but there's like integrated circuit designers which have to, I guess at the end of the day, you have to lay out every single transistor. And like I remember doing this in a class in high school where we were making a very simple ALU, like the circuit that just adds numbers, which is just one small part of a CPU, and the CPU is one small part of like one of those ASICs or one of those chips that you see. But even you have to lay it out by hand, and it's not just side by side laying out. You lay out everything, all the metal for one layer, and then you'll stack like 5 or 6 layers of this on top of each other with different points of contact. So it's like a tons of layers, like it's like a 3D thing. um, and these days a lot of computers can aid in the design of laying out these transistors, and a human will go in and touch it up to make sure, because humans still place everything on all the wires as best they can. But as far as I know, like this is where like I don't know so much, but like very rarely do like the semiconductor companies in the US actually manufacture these things. It's only the plan, like Qualcomm, where I used to work, it would, the point where Qualcomm ends is the specification for these chips, and then we send it off to a Taiwanese company to get it manufactured, and they have all the right equipment and the right, like personnel. Like it comes there, and like you have those big circular wafers, and on the wafers you have all the, I don't know how many like chips each wafer holds, but it's a lot, and then you cut it all. Um, but
So
that's
what you're saying then, if I understand correctly, is that
yeah.
rather than having a flat piece of something and laying out a bunch of transistors on top of it, you're stacking these layers and then cutting through it this direction. Is that right?
The transistors themselves are like, at the end of the day, I think the transistors are just like layers of metal, and you can the layers of metal run. Um, I guess they just run like 2D, and then they're like a house, like what Johnny said, is kind of like a Lego. So you can like stack layers of them together with different points of contact. But then once that's done, I think they lay out a lot of them all in this one big like wafer thing. They just lay it all out there, and then they cut it all into those squares, and they put plastic on those squares. So, um, I mean, that's what I always thought it would happen. I took a little mini tour. I just saw the documentary, and I think I went on a mini tour of a little manufacturing lab somewhere. I know some companies like Samsung have their own manufacturing labs, but for the most part, like Nvidia, Qualcomm, they just do the chip design and then they send it off to Asia for the actual manufacturing and testing. Um, but yeah, it's a crazy process, and these things are, yeah, like you said, they're like on the level of affecting physics. So
That just blows my mind. Like if
yeah,
we can't get any smaller than that, it's like, okay,
yeah,
we've reached the limit, right? So
yeah,
are we looking at are we potentially looking at different types of technology, especially when it comes to storing information? I remember a few years ago, they were saying that, we'll reach a point where that's as much, you can get so many terabytes or the petabyte or whatever it is onto this memory, and
right.
then you're out of room. But then they started talking about storing memory in DNA. Are you familiar with that?
Storing memory in DNA.
Yeah, so apparently they again, this was in the development stages, so who knows? They also said there was a cure for cancer right around the corner at that time. So, but they did talk about having found a way to encode DNA in order to store data, and the amount of data, because DNA is a super efficient way of storing information. I mean, the amount of info that we have in a strand of DNA is just ridiculous, right?
Right.
So they thought that this would be the answer. If we can figure out an efficient way and a cost-effective way to store information in DNA, and it could be from anywhere, it doesn't really matter, that the amount and the size that it would, the real estate that would take up would be minimal, and you could just have tons of strings of data that were just insane. On the tip of your finger, you could have like 500 gigabytes worth of data stored there. I'm just guessing at it. And
Yeah.
then that story kind of went away. So I don't know if that's even in the planning
Yeah.
stages at this point.
From my impression, that sounds cool and all, but I think the sentiment these days is usually that like data is still very cheap and stuff. And I think with the advent of the like just like the internet improving and like bandwidth improving, like if you have like crazy cloud storage, and like maybe like if you have, maybe we all have gigabit network one day, and then having stuff in the cloud in like random data centers like under the ocean or you don't know where, it's going to be just as fast and unlimited to anything you can imagine physically owning. So I think there will be a time where we nothing is tied to us on our person. I guess it's just a matter of really hooking into the network, which is just getting like crazier and crazier. Like network speeds, like if you have fast network speeds, you can just write to the cloud like faster than you can write to your hard drives sometimes. So,
Wow.
um, and then also the space really is cheap. Like I don't know if you ever watched like Citizen 4, that Snowden documentary. Like the first scene is just this random construction site in Utah. They're just building data centers. They're just like
Right.
that's for like CIA collect crazy government stuff. But you, they're just building these things. It's kind of like terrible for the environment, some people might say. But space is my impression currently is that space is very cheap, and it's not even a big issue these days. Like space is enabling all this data, all this AI machine learning trends, and it's like they just keep adding to it. And I think once we have a strong network, it's just going to make things even faster to like hook up. So I don't think you need that much local storage, to be honest. Like, just even if it's in a DNA or chip or maybe the next generation USB device, I think eventually you won't even need to carry anything. So
Hmm.
we'll see if that happens. But I know people will always carry stuff. Like you have your Bitcoin private key, like in like
You're
tattoo
right.
tattooed to
You
your
have
body.
like three things
Yeah.
that you have to carry on your person, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay.
Yeah.
So we only have a couple minutes left.
Oh,
And if I didn't already run this by you, that's okay. We don't have to dig too
yeah.
deep into it, but I did want to mention it tonight because this is something that we've seen kind of surfacing. And I wondered if you might have some insight to this. So the iPhone 7, and I'm
Uh-huh.
going to use this as actually, I have an iPhone 7. So are you familiar with the touch disease that the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus went through a while back?
No, what was that? Touch
Okay,
disease.
so what had happened is when they went from the 5S, they dramatically changed the form factor on the iPhone. And the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, one of the things that they wanted to do was reduce the weight and the thickness of the phone itself. So they decided not to add a certain amount of reinforcing material on the inside of the housing. You know, these things that we're back to where there's a metal housing on the outside.
Uh-huh.
And they kind of went with a very thin housing. This is a 7, but on the 6, it's particularly weak. And what would happen is people would put the phone in their pocket, it would bend, and over time, a specific integrated circuit which was responsible for transmitting the touch input from the screen to the processor
Uh-huh.
had a pad underneath the IC that just seemed to be a weak spot. So as that stress was placed on the phone, there was one specific pad that would become detached. And if you don't have that communication anymore,
Oh,
your touchscreen wouldn't respond, and you typically see gray bars at the top of the phone. Now, Apple has come out and said, yes, we realize this is a problem. We're going to offer something for people who are affected by it and so forth. And coincidentally, just as of the last few months, we found that the iPhone 7, and this tends to happen a bit out of warranty for most people. So if you had an iPhone 6 or you have an iPhone 7, you're probably good for a year and a half. And then we start to see what we call signature failures. So there are certain types of any hardware that eventually break down over time.
right.
And for the iPhone 7, this one's a little different. What happened is there's an integrated circuit, if you can imagine, right underneath about this area here, which is just below where the SIM card tray is on the side of the phone. And we're seeing that the same process is happening where one, two, or three of the pads underneath the audio IC are detaching from the logic board. And when they do, of course, you don't have that communication anymore, and it will manifest as no audio on the phone. The phone will not boot properly. It gets stuck on the Apple logo. It might take 3 to 5 minutes to boot. There are a number of specific
Oh, damn.
symptoms that we look for to identify that. And the solution is we remove the IC, we run an extra jumper wire from the affected pad to the correct circuit so that even if the pad separates from the logic board, we still have communication, and you solve that problem. So my question, and was hoping to get an engineer's perspective on this, is, and this topic came up last week. So we have two people who are very big in the phone industry, and they talk about what they think could be improved in a lot of these products. And one of them is a lady named Jessa Jones, and her theory is that because the center of the phone seems to be kind of the first place it's going to be likely to flex if you place stress on it. So let's say you sit on your phone, you've got it in your back pocket, front pocket, you're running around and it starts to move. That tiny bit of flex going on there might be putting pressure on that circuit. But the thing is, it's always the same spot. So it's consistently failing in one area. And we had another guy who does a lot of these repairs, and he actually commented on my channel last week and said, it's very difficult to bend an iPhone 7. So his feeling is it's probably not the phone flexing that's causing the problem, but rather when people drop it, that's just kind of a weak spot there. And if you drop your phone enough times, eventually that pad will detach. And, if this isn't a good question for you, no problem. But I just figured since you have some background in the hardware area for engineering, any thoughts on, when we attach these things to a PCB, have there historically been areas where, oh, there's a manufacturing defect or the design flaw that would cause something like that to happen over time that you're aware of?
And
Heat, any other factor like that?
yeah, honestly, it's tough for me to answer. I know that whoever plans the layout of the PCB has like an important job to either he or she must be very aware of like I guess different proximity of where they put special integrated circuits, because I guess when you have your whole PCB, there's probably so many different processors around, ones that maybe handle the touch bar or ones that are like doing your motion and things. And if those are maybe not placed properly, or maybe placed at a point where um, it's easy to bend, then that's could also be a problem. So it could be many things, like anywhere in the, you could maybe attribute it to anything. You could all the way from like a careless owner just dropping it way too many times. There's not much you can do about that. But also it could be like maybe the layout was just a little off, and didn't think about it too much in like real world examples, because um, yeah, like it could be a lot of things too, like manufacturing things, and all the way down to whoever the person is that designs where the circuits go on the PCB. They could also have like an influence on how like susceptible like the phone is to this these damages. So it's a
Fair
lot.
enough.
It's a lot of
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
they probably fired him by now anyways, but
Yeah.
no, and that's cool. Right now everyone, it's kind of still under debate as far as, what kind, and the real question is not really what caused the problem, but how do we fix it? That's the more important one, and hopefully avoid that in the future. So no worries.
Yeah.
I just wanted to run that by you. And with that, I think we have reached our 1 hour mark. So let's check the comments real quick and make sure that we didn't miss anything. And then I'll let you go. I know I don't want to keep you too late here. Let's see. These are Jawbreaker house inside an LC bowl. What? They're talking about Westworld hosts.
Oh,
I've got to get caught up, guys. Next week, I just got my HBO.
everyone's talking about Westworld. Yeah.
Yeah, Westworld is
Everyone's talking.
because we're in tech. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I saw the original movie when I was a kid, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And now that I'm so excited they made a series out of that. They're actually talking about bringing back. And they did the Lost in Space reboot, which, again, as a kid, I was a big fan. I know it was way back in the 1900s. But they're also talking about doing a Logan's Run, which would be, I think, a cool concept for now. Why don't they develop flexible circuits to solve all of the bend gate problems?
Oh man.
I'm going to guess cost.
Yeah.
Would designing something like a flexible PCB with attached integrated circuits just be like a ridiculously expensive endeavor?
Probably, like, unless you want like a phone that you can like wrap around your wrist or something, like a flexible. I know, did some company try like a flexible phone or something? But I'm sure the cost would be crazy to make.
Yeah, LG had one that would flex to a certain extent, but it did not catch on. And I don't really blame the technology as much as I do that LG's just not really staying focused on any one particular thing, I think.
Yeah.
Let's see. Anyone watch Louis Rossman response to LSD? Try to check it out. Okay, cool. So I think that's it. Dave, if you'll hang on for just a second, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast. I won't end the call just yet, but I will let you go shortly. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Be sure to check out Dave's channel. Let me go ahead and give you that link again, because if someone comes through here later on, and it will be in the video description in case I edit this video, which I might have to do later, definitely check that out. Interesting stuff, especially if you get excited about engineering. And let's see if we can do this properly. My plan was to say, Dave Hangout, I'll see you in a minute. And everyone else, whoops, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Anyways, everyone, I'll see you again Monday, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Probably not next Thursday. I may take a night off. But if that changes, then you will see me, but probably not. All right. I know it sounds very definite. In any case, have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you later.